Lava water. The interrogation room never failed to produce a giggle. Concrete walls, the two-way mirror, and a single bulb overhead. It intentionally looked like a movie set. For most people, living vicariously through characters on the screen would be the closest they would ever get to real secret questioning. Government builders took care to design rooms in a style that would ensure intimidation with familiarity. They always looked to Hollywood. She understood the psychology. The boy hadn't cried or resisted. Most anyone else in his fix would be at least sweating bullets. He impressed her with his cool, unbothered air that was only half fabricated. The handcuffs that held him to the chair were a stretch, but she left them attached for now. She needed surety. How old are you, Christopher?
17. You know you can't question me without my parents.
Do you know why you are here?
I jumped into the fountain in front of the museum. It was just a stunt.
A stunt? Those are cool, huh? And what happened when you jumped into the fountain?
I just started splashing around, just being silly. It was a joke.
Jokes. Jokes usually involved a few people and lots of laughter. Did you hear laughter, Christopher?
I wasn't listening for it.
So you jump in, splash, splash, and then out.
Well, the cops helped with the out.
And you didn't happen to pick up anything from that fountain? From the boy, 2 blinks in quick succession, then a firm response.
No, I didn't. The cops searched me.
She met his eyes full on and held them. Where's the coin, Christopher? She heard his breath hitch. An insignificant sound, undetectable if she wasn't anticipating it.
I'm pretty sure I have no idea what you're talking about. What coin?
She made sure he saw her smile. Tell me about your home life, Christopher.
No. And speaking of which, again, I'm still a minor. You can't talk to me without my parents. It's the law.
Christopher, let me make sure you understand your circumstances right now. You have been moved in the dead of night to the southwestern desert, to an underground facility, ferried by helicopters that would not show up on any surveillance system known to man. The local police don't even know where you are or who exactly transported you. Do you think those laws are going to apply to you at this moment? The boy slouched, leaning back, resigned, but still not frightened. Again, impressive. She repeated the request.
Like what? I live in the burbs. I'm a senior. No siblings. I'm pretty sure you all know that, though.
He nodded to a folder on the table. Parents?
I have a pair, yeah.
Not real ones, right? Christopher shifted in his seat. Where's the coin? Where's the coin? Where's the coin? Where's the coin? A heavy, invisible mass pressed on Major Victor Barkley for the past 2 hours. Most would call the mass annoyance. It coincided, coincidentally, with the arrival of helicopters. Accommodating civilians was one of the perks of his position. He preferred a hot poker to the eye if offered instead. Civilians in his facility never brought enthusiasm, especially ones that came with instructions. Major Barkley had not even been given the courtesy of the woman's name and was certain he would never obtain it. What he did obtain were 2 strict orders from a general he knew only by reputation. The first, to give this unknown woman anything she requested. The other, to stay the hell out of her way. He knew the drill and did as he was told. That command didn't stop the questions that batted around his head. He addressed the corporal seated in front of the computer screen, watching a waveform. "Have we figured out what language that is?" The corporal perked up as if shaken out of a doze. No, sir. The translator has not been able to pick up on that yet." The major swore under his breath. The small room did not adequately accommodate the 4 men occupying it. 2 of the officers who arrived with the helicopter stood to one side. They wore matching, dark, off-the-rack suits, as nondescript as their faces. He could smell the soap one of them used. Cloying. Equally imposing was his want to leave. It nipped at his heels like a playful puppy. He felt the urge to get into his car and drive, past his house and out of the state. He silenced it with the same hard-edged voice he used to quiet his sons when they got out of line. He would not let these strangers take over his facility. Even if he had to open the door to them, he was not going to leave them the keys. No sooner than he quieted the broadcast, words he recognized issued through the speakers. "Where's the coin?" Christopher feigned ignorance again. She hadn't narrowed down whether his defiance was out of bravery or stupidity. Either intrigued. "So when were you adopted?" She found the worn patch in his soul that could be easily punctured and injure intensely. She could barely hear his response of, 5. "It's not easy when you lack history." She had his attention. He looked up, meeting her eyes, his swimming in a vague cheerlessness. "Yeah, having a history is like having foundation, you know. Even if your history is bad, at least you know there are others that share your experience, this life. Doesn't having history somehow mean you weren't a mistake? That you were destined to be here, thus not an error? Wouldn't you have a new sense of purpose? That little hole in your chronicle will never quite fill up, will it? It'll get covered because you have loving people taking good care of you. It'll calcify. But isn't it better to have it filled?"
I wouldn't know.
His words were ambivalent, his brave face practically convincing. Before she could speak, she picked up on a low rumble. She remained silent, waiting for it to repeat. From the other side of the mirror, Major Barkley looked up from the file he had desperately been attempting to read. "Did anyone hear that?" The other members of the room shook their heads. He let his attention linger, listening. Nothing. He returned to the file. "Where's the coin?" The ears behind the mirror picked up again. This time, the boy said nothing. She removed her jacket. The obligatory firearm at her hip grabbed his attention. She sat in the chair across from him, intensity in her stare. "Have you ever heard of the Monkoi people?"
What does that have to do with anything?
She held up her index finger. "So I'm guessing no. Great. They existed on an island off the coast of Africa. So as the story goes, the Monkoi were perpetual antagonists, and for a long time plagued with bad luck. It is believed to be because of their guardian. Somehow, they got what they thought was the short end of the stick. Their guardian was different, I guess is the right word for it. He had to be appeased in a certain manner, or else he would grow restless and cheeky, setting the Monkoi on a path of destruction. After a time, they ignored their dark guardian and feared him, which only made him act out. It convinced them to join up with losing factions and enemies. They assisted the Europeans in the acquisition of people for slavery. And of course, as would be the case, the Europeans turned on them and made them into slaves. the Monkoi people were decimated. Their numbers are so small now, they're basically an extinct tribe. Sad, really. There came a thunderous boom that resonated through the thick walls and iron doors of the room. This time, the other men heard it. Major Barkley looked to the corporal and nodded to him. The young man jumped up, eager for the task, and disappeared out of the room. Barkley waited. Christopher heard the thud and turned his ear to the sound. It could have been far. The noise of the underground facility carried oddly, bouncing off walls thick with metal and rock. She continued with no acknowledgement of the disturbance. And the funny thing was, the Guardian was easily controlled and willing to please. They were just afraid to use the dark energy. Generations being told it was evil and whatnot. Incredible, right? Her eyes were wide with wonder. Anyway, turns out the Guardian is highly sensitive to copper. I mean sensitive in a way like a cat to catnip. It loves it. Unfortunately, the Monkoi figured this out a little too late. Most of the tribe was shipped off to the Americas to make rich men richer. The ones who were left made small little discs of copper to coax the Guardian into doing their bidding. But again, the Guardian is difficult. It gobbles up the copper and half-asses the request because, why not? It got what it wanted. So after some trial and error, and a further hit to their numbers, they discovered that if the copper is with another metal, the Guardian couldn't just gobble it up. He could only lick it and get satisfaction. Once he was satisfied, he was willing to do as he was told and nothing else. So the remaining folks made coins. They made the inside a different metal, tungsten, gold, nickel, whatever, and coated it with copper. It worked like a charm. Soon, the Monkoi were revitalized. In spite of the interrogation and chilling situation, Christopher was engrossed.
What happened then?
Unfortunately, many of them got exactly what they wanted, but not quite what they bargained for, and met the end they deserved. 87 coins were made, and most were lost. It is said that the coins are imbued with the spirit of the people. Those who share their lineage can hear the calling. And when found by a Monkoi, the metal would produce a frequency that calls the Guardian to them. But that's crazy talk, right? The corporal had not returned nor called. Major Barkley reached for the handset of the ridiculously ancient phone to call the top office when the thud sounded again, this time louder. It was accompanied by another sound, screams of terror. In addition to the copper, the Guardian had another requirement.
What is that?
What drew you to that fountain, Christopher? The scream reached the ears of the young boy. She could see the hair stand up on his arm and the skin break out in goose flesh. He dropped the casual bewilderment.
I'm not sure. It was like an itch. It had been at me for weeks.
Another scream. Thud. Crash. Scream. She looked at her watch, aloud but not directed to the boy. Right on time. The sounds from outside the room chilled Barkley to the bone. The color left his face, quickly replaced by a flush as he withdrew his firearm from the holster. The rhythmic thuds grew louder, closer. With it, a constant and steady scraping, akin to a screwdriver dragging across metal. The officers now wore matching looks of fear. Each followed the major's lead and drew their weapons. It stopped right outside the door. The metal door was at least an inch thick, but Barkley had lost faith that it would matter. He cursed himself for not leaving a final time and let it go. The first hit to the barrier made a visible dent, the metal bowing. The next hit, the sound bouncing in the small space, caused a high-pitched ringing in his ears. The third hit, he could see the hinges and bolts being pulled from the doorframe. On the fourth and final hit, the metal door, dented and battered, fell to the floor. The room shook as Barkley had just enough time to process what came across the beaten threshold. He and the others brought up their guns and began firing. None were able to empty the clip. The gunshots were definitely coming from behind the mirror. Christopher jumped, attempted to flee, forgot about the cuffs. He clawed uselessly at the restraints, showing the first signs of panic. She grabbed the boy by the face and met his eyes. She stared into them, saying nothing. He didn't speak either, but settled back and ceased fighting. She removed a set of keys from her pocket, releasing the boy from the metal bracelets. "And what I want you to do now, young man, is remove that coin from your shoe and put it in your hand." He did not protest or try for a denial. He obediently removed his shoe, turned it over, and let the coin drop in his hand. You see, the key to harnessing dark energy is to not use it for malice. Purifying the intention brings light into the dark and makes it more powerful than if separated. Lessons learned along the way. She turned his chair as he sat and faced the door. Loud clumps stopped on the other side. She stood behind the boy, leaned down to whisper in his ear. History is important. Not only does it tell us where we've been, it teaches us the things we need to change to become the most powerful versions of ourselves. It is the least we can do for the gods. The boy barely heard her words over the jackhammering of his heart. "Do me a favor, kid. Try not to scream." The lever that opened the heavy door turned, and it swung wide. The creature had to duck to enter the room. Its ears were large, nearly as long as its head, and pointed sharply. The red of its skin reminded Christopher of Jasper. When it saw the two people in the room, the warmth in its single eye could not be mistaken. "Hello, my lord. I would like you to meet our son." If you enjoy this content, don't be shy. Go ahead and like, share, and subscribe.